Special Counsel, please call the roll.
Director Barnes,
Here.
Director Duplessis, Director Sloss,
Here.
Director Scholas,
Present.
Director Howard.
Here. Chair, we do have a quorum.
Great, thank you so much. So we haven't met in a while, but that is not an indicator of a lack of focus on strategy at the staff or board level. Today we're looking forward to hearing how the strategic plan is being implemented by the staff and also monitored and tracked by the board through the operations committee. Then we can begin to look to the future with a discussion about the master planning process. And I think we have Darren Thomas on the phone to answer any questions, but Tyler Antrup is going to make our proceed with the presentation item. So Tyler, you're on.
Great, let me just figure out the technology here.
Okay.
Never quite works when you want it to. Are we on the...
Both, huh? Uh-oh.
Do I have to do that, or what do I need to go to that link and do an update, or? Okay. All right, so let me get this full screen for you. As Robin said, we just wanted to do a quick update on our strategic plan now that it's been about 6 months since we adopted it. I did also send along in the email on Friday to you all this rather large and detailed update document, which is essentially a summary of the work that's been done so far by the staff and the work that's going to be done for the rest of the year and our progress thus far on it. So I wanted to just briefly give you some key updates in that those implementation working groups that we've discussed throughout the process are continuing to meet and complete their tactics. So they're meeting quarterly. Some of them have elected to meet monthly, which is really encouraging and meaning that they're continuing to remain accountable to their tactics that they're working on. What's especially encouraging is that the working groups are maturing into these venues for more communication amongst different staff and departments, which is something that we didn't necessarily expect from the process, but are really happy to see as an outcome. So, some of these working groups are beginning to work on other larger issues that we didn't really expect them to tackle. And so again, this is all encouraging outcomes from the strategic planning process that we're able to create more communication amongst departments and staff that typically don't work together. The development of our dashboard to track the progress is complete. However, some of the data that we need to populate into the key performance indicators, we're still working on gathering that data. So there's placeholders in some places throughout the report that you'll see, but in most places we've begun to populate that data. And over the next few months, we'll begin to fill it in more. And so in terms of what it means that the dashboard is developed is that all of this information in here is essentially an export from the dashboard. So this is exactly what is displayed in there. There we go. And so in terms of next steps for implementation of the strategic plan, we're continuing to track the progress on each of those metrics. As you see in the document that, we show % complete for each of the items and then notes on what the last update was in June. Again, we were hoping to have a meeting of this committee in July, so some of the information is a bit outdated. We're meeting again with those groups in September, so there'll be new updates at that time. The working groups are continuing to add new work as each of the tactics are completed. So that way we're continuing to work towards the overall goals and results. So in other words, if we complete a tactic and then we think, okay, well, that didn't quite solve the problem, let's add additional tactics and continue to drive towards what our goal is on that particular item. In September, we're going to begin our 2023 work planning effort, meaning that everything that we're working on this year was just stuff that we said we thought we could accomplish this year. And so once we've begun to accomplish all of that as we are, we'll begin planning for what we think we can accomplish next year to continue to build on that progress over the total 5-year plan. And then in terms of diving into the specifics of the work that's being done in each of the focus areas, I know that we've discussed bringing that before the operations committee so that we can do sort of deep dives into 2 of the focus areas at each meeting for that committee. And so this committee can really continue to focus their work on the longer term planning efforts like we're going to discuss here in a minute, and then more of the implementation tooling can happen in the operations committee under Janet's direction. So any questions about the strategic plan update?
Yes. I'm looking at the first page of it, which has focus areas and goals and different percentages. It's actually page 2 on the electronic version. I don't understand what I'm looking at in the sense that if it says focus areas and goals, we have a 5-year plan, right? If it tells me something's 50% complete, does that mean for the whole project? Does that mean for just whatever the specific tactics listed here are?
Yeah, so it's just for this year.
Okay. And can you explain, just for example, looking at technology modernization, the different colors, et cetera?
Yep. Yeah, so red colors would mean that they're a bit behind schedule. Yellow means that they're pretty much on schedule or a little bit behind, and blue means that you're ahead of schedule. And in terms of schedule, the way that the dashboard works is it essentially you set a start date and an end date. Almost everything ends at the end of the year, and it just sort of approximates across that time, you know, how much progress you'll make from the beginning to the end.
And where is all this information going in the organization? I mean, who's is it you, Tyler, who oversees it all? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so the way that we're doing this right now is we have these quarterly update meetings with the working groups, or like I said, in some cases, they're meeting more frequently. And when we have those meetings, we're going through each of the tactics and saying, okay, this says, you know, so-and-so, you said that over the last 2 months, you were going to do this thing. Mm-hmm. Have you done it? No, why not? Or if you have, great, give us an update on, you know, what has resulted from that. And then we'll live update the dashboard and say, you know, okay, this person said on this date, they've completed it, this has been the result, or, you know, they need more time, so maybe we'll move out the deadline and say, you know, someone left, for instance, and so we don't have staff to complete it right now. Once we have a new staff person in, then we'll begin work on it again, and, you know, we'll revisit it at the next meeting.
Okay, and then when we're talking about the column that says results over here.
Should we put this page up on the screen? Is that easy?
Yeah, I can just,
excuse me, Janet.
Yeah, of course.
So everybody can see it.
That.
I've read it, I just.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so when I look at that, and I'll just take the first focus area as an example.
Yep.
And it says results, delinquency rate 16.8. What's our goal?
Yeah, so when you drill down into the specific focus area dashboards, at times that we've already identified what our specific I'm sorry, I'm losing the word that I'm thinking of. Our target. Thank you.
Okay.
Our specific target for some things. So some things we have developed targets, some things we haven't, because we kind of want to get a chance to track the data for a little while and see where we're running. Some things, like we've talked about before, are benchmarkable. Some things aren't, depending on what we're measuring. So we do still need to do a little bit of work, in particular hopefully with the work we'll be doing with you in the operations committee, to determine what those targets should be so that we can start to really drive results towards them. Okay,
and I still have a problem, and I don't know if this goes to operations committee or not, with a lack of correlation between what is stated as what we're doing, the focus area, and the results, the measures that we're using. And they're not benchmarks, they're actual, what's the word, Tyler?
I'm already demonstrating that I'm not good with my words today. So
Snapshots.
Yeah. Okay. So if we say we're I think that when we're doing, without knowing what our goal is, and without knowing where we've come from, I think it's very
hard to see
hard
trends
for this.
Right. Yeah.
For anyone to take a quick look at this without reading 43 pages and figuring out whether we're making progress or not.
Yeah. Let me see if I can give you an example to kind of talk through that.
Well, before you, sorry, but in the same kind of vein, did I understand you to say that these are goals for this calendar year?
So the goals
So-
are the 5-year goals. So the goals that we set, I'm using the words that we use in the plan. So you have focus areas, and then underneath focus areas you have goals. Those two things remain the same over the 5 years, but underneath the goals you have tactics, which are the ways that we think that we need to do individual actions to achieve the goals. The tactics are annual, or in some cases they do run multiple years, but for the most part, we're setting those on an annual basis in the work plan. So the goals will remain the same every year over the course of the plan, and essentially we're saying by year 5 we'll be in really good shape in terms of this goal. So
But we've not achieved 50, I mean, this is kind of misleading.
I understand. I'm understanding what you're saying now, and I agree that we probably need to say like annual goal progress
Yeah,
rather
because we're
than just
not
goal
50%
progress.
there.
That we are over. It's
50%
intended to
or 20%.
reflect the progress on the work that we've done this year.
Yeah,
And so for the purposes of this year, we started essentially at 0, so it is accurate in terms of our progress to date from 0. But probably going into next year, we need to figure out a way to incorporate last year's progress into current year's progress towards a 5-year goal.
but also, Tyler, we're not 50% towards our 5-year goal.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm saying of our work that we're doing this year, of our
Okay, I think that
tactics
needs
that we
to be
have
made
this year.
clear,
Yeah, I'm hearing that.
We're
So part of-
10%. Yeah,
Essentially, yeah.
10%.
Yeah.
Coco?
I don't want to introduce a radical thought here, but why do we care about the annual goals? I mean, if it's a 3-year project, then percent of 3 years. If it's 5 years, percent of 5 years. If it's 1 year, percent of 1 year.
Because it keeps us accountable to our progress towards the goal.
So there's
So-
sort of a who needs to know things when. So I see the annual goal being really critical for staff, right?
Right.
Because they have, they have to complete things by year. But I think,
But that's just
What
because we
you're-
say that. Well, never mind. Okay.
but actually what you're saying is important is sort of what's our vision for this and what are we looking at over the long term. So I get, and I remember actually this came up when we were doing the planning, that we didn't have targets for everything.
Mhm.
And the case was made that we had to do some work, collect data, do some benchmarking, that sort of thing. And so is it reasonable for year 2 of this to introduce targets for almost everything, if not everything? And then to kind of, so part of this is how we're communicating it, right?
Yep.
And how it's written and how it's illustrated and all that kind of stuff, to be sort of more clear about what's an annual target, what's a 5-year target.
Yeah, I mean, you would see more in operations committee, more call them intermediate or accomplishable goals within a set period of time. So you can establish, you have a bigger goal, but then realistically you can only accomplish so much within the first year. It's working toward a bigger goal, right? So it's incremental, but then you have to measure to see that you are improving, you're moving in the right direction, and how fast and the pace.
Or,
right?
or not, so that
Or
we can
if we're
see,
not,
right?
we need another tactic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to Robin's point, it's where this really becomes a useful tool is when we have those implementation working group meetings with the staff, and we can go in the dashboard and say, like I said, so and so's name, Poco, you said you were going to do this thing over the last couple of weeks, and this says that you should be at 80%.
Yeah.
Where are you?
Yeah.
And you say, oh no, I've been busy doing other things. Then I can say, well, the dashboard says you're supposed to be at 80%. You said you were going to be done by this date, and then and so then by the next meeting they better be done.
I got it.
okay.
Sorry to call you.
No, I
out.
was just saying, but an annual thing is, I get for employees, but it's kind of, it's
Yeah.
Well, also for you to see that we are.
Right, to make sure that we're making progress.
Also, there are probably some bigger metrics than other metrics, like not every metric is equal, so delinquency, big metric,
Yep.
right? And so seeing more trend data on that, like, so, I mean, that's just a number. We have no idea if that was, unless we remember, is that less or more than last year, and what's next year? So kind of, it really looks like progress if you're showing historical, where have we come? And then you can kind of set your goals for where are we going.
Yeah,
And-
and let me show you an example of, so like for instance here, we have started to put in trend data, so where we're collecting data going back a little bit further. So again, a lot of this is taking a lot of time, more time than we expected to collect data.
Right.
We collect a ton of data here, but often it's, one person collects a single point of data and keeps it in a spreadsheet. So it's taking a lot of time to go in and figure out who's that person, how do I get it? And as we're getting it, we're putting it in. So you can see that there are trends that you can start to derive from the data. As best as we can, we're trying to go back to January 2021 with all data so that we have a year baseline before the plan adoption. And then as we go through time, you'll be able to track the whole planning period in terms of the data for each of the key performance indicators.
Tyler, in workforce development and enrichment,
Yep.
I have trouble going from what is going on in the left part to what that has to do with FTEs per account or FTEs per MGD.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing in here that indicates we're trying to reduce, expand, or anything workforce. So why are those measures there?
So FTEs per MGD and for water, wastewater, and per account are benchmarkable through American Water Works Association for efficiency. And so the reason they're split between water and wastewater is because they measure it differently for different types of utilities. But the essential fact is that, if generally a water utility has, say 5 employees per account and we have 20, then we know that we're not very efficient because we have way more employees than we probably need to have to operate a similarly sized utility. And so it's a little clunky, but it's an industry standard to measure that.
But where in the goals is that right sizing? I guess that's my question.
It'll be the target number, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's...
But in terms of what we're doing, in terms of what workforce development and enrichment and the tactics that are under that, what relates to that?
Well, the entire thing is about, in particular, the workforce model discussion, looking at, are we appropriately staffed and how do we actually, interact with our staff in terms of the staffing model that we have? I think it majorly impacts the work that happens there. If we know that we're extremely inefficient in terms of we have way more employees than we probably need to have, part of that could be a symptom of the workforce model that we have.
Okay.
When do you think you'll have the target data in there?
Well, I think in some ways it needs to be, developed in coordination with the board. So you mean when to have the data in here?
Yeah, I'm just wondering when the peer data, you're going to plug in peer data?
Oh, the peer data.
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as we get the data for this, which I think I actually received yesterday, so we just need to plug it in. Then we can go.
Outdated.
Yeah, because it's from
Interesting.
Friday. Like a
Very
lot of it has
interesting,
come in over the last few days. But once we have that data, we'll plug it in, and then we can add in the AW. So the things that are benchmarkable because they come from AWWA, it's just a matter of plugging it in.
That'll be
once we
very
have it.
telling, I would think.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think it'll be very interesting to find out where we're at on that.
I think some of these comments today are very much about sort of the process itself. So if we could put a dashboard up just for the process of the strategic plan, it's like having more sort of continuous improvement of this process. So some of the things we talked about is how are we communicating things, establishing more targets, really, understanding whether it's an annual target or a multi-year target, that sort of thing. But
Yep.
I think this discussion is good for sort of what, what's our expectation of sort of what we want to be looking at.
Yep.
Is, so that you don't have to kind of drill down to everything and show us examples, that there's more kind of information that's self-explanatory. And it's, I feel like we could get there.
Yeah, I appreciate it because I think that it's obviously helpful for me to understand what it's helpful for you all to sort of understand and what you want to know. Because, as we said, a lot of this is really for the staff to keep us accountable. And so it's important, though, that we're able to communicate that to you all because you're ultimately who we're trying to be accountable to, in addition to our customers. So, I think this is a good discussion. As I said, I think I'm really looking forward to doing more in-depth discussions of the work plans and the tactics that are happening with the operations committee going forward. So, any other?
Yeah, I have one. I think this just underscores how important it is that we can collect the data how we want to collect it, but how you communicate it out is going to change depending on whether you're talking to staff, us, or even the public. Because I think there'll be things that we want to know that the public will be like, okay, what does that have to do with anything?
Exactly. Exactly.
And if we get to the what does it have to do with anything, people turn off.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's been something that's been very humbling about the experience of collecting this data and getting it in the dashboard is I'm realizing, some of this data you get it and you're like, this doesn't mean anything, or I can't work with this. And so that's why it's taking a lot longer is, taking a lot of data from a lot of different sources. Quality varies, and so it's been a good exercise for us to go through. And I hope that over the next year-ish, as we go through this process, we'll continue to improve the data side of things as well, so that we get really clear, useful metrics for all of us to base our progress off of.
And it's okay to have different, to Maurice's point, different sets of data for different eyes,
Yep.
right? Because there's some micro data that is just confusing to anybody but the staff working on it.
Yep.
But we got to get to kind of the data that we can look at. It's self-explanatory to us. It can go public,
Yep.
with it's all public, but like where it's self-explanatory
Yep.
and doesn't require a lot of.
Yeah, and trust me, there's a lot of data that's not being displayed here.
Yeah.
Janet, were you about to say something?
Just a question, when we have things that, if this is supposed to be for fiscal year 2022, a lot of these tactics end in July, October, whatever. Is there a follow-up tactic that should be in here that we know is going to happen, is supposed to happen within the year?
So in some cases, yes. In some cases, no. In some cases, perhaps a tactic is sort of the end of a specific thing that we were working on. Maybe it was a more discrete project. In some cases it is, and in which case, there are a few cases where things may have ended in July and we haven't captured the follow-up tactic because we met last in June and we meet again in September. So when we meet in September with the groups, we'll say, okay, you were supposed to finish this in July. Did you finish it? If you did, what's the next step? And if we have a next step, then we will put that in here. And we'll put a new end date for that. We'll put new progress towards it, new notes. So it's a little bit iterative in terms of how we have to work with it, in that essentially myself and Darren are owning the content in here. We're not sort of opening it up for everyone free for all to go in and enter their stuff, just to keep it clean and efficient and easy to do. So it does mean that there are gaps in time where things aren't being updated and then it gets all updated at once.
Which is kind of my question. Is there a way for people to update their own thing without having to have a meeting to do it? It seems to me like, geez, you have to wait for a meeting.
Eventually.
I mean, there is a way to do it. Certainly we can give everyone logins and they can do it. That's a bit more of a lift in terms of just making sure everyone's trained in how to use the software and that they're doing it appropriately. But I think that there's value. The meetings are an hour every 3 months. So
I think you shouldn't meet, but if
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
finishes something in month one, if they could send it to an administrative person who could
Yeah.
update that, then
yeah,
I would want to know if it was one company.
true.
If it was done.
I think it's a good point, and I will say often, just in informal conversations with folks, they'll say like, "Oh, I finished that up" or whatever, and I'll go in and update it then. If someone tells me something, or if I happen to ask. But typically, we're doing it on a more formal basis through the meetings. But I think it's a good thing to think about.
Okay, then we can, I think unless there are any more comments or questions, we can move on to our discussion item, which is the master planning
Can
process.
I ask one more
Oh,
question?
sure, Jenna.
Sorry.
No problem.
I'm still a little confused or concerned, I'm not sure which, that if we're doing a tactic right now, okay, it's gonna end this year, and we're trying to see, I don't understand where that tactic leads. I'm having trouble getting the overall picture that if there's something that needs to be done and are there 10 steps to it? Are there 5 steps to it? Where do we stand on the global 5-year thing? I mean, we're working towards something. If we don't know what we're working towards,
That's the annual.
it all
issue.
becomes meaningless. And so I don't understand where to get that picture still.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times we are not clear on what necessarily the end looks like in terms of every single thing that needs to happen on the way in some cases. So for instance, if one of the items is, for us to improve our budgeting process, someone like Dexter from budget might say, well, I think that, we need a new policy that guides, this specific way that we do this thing. And so we say, all right, over the next few months, you're going to develop a new policy and, tell us how much time you need to do that, the steps you need to do that. And so then he does the policy, and we find out that, people aren't following the policy, or the policy isn't working, or it missed something, or for some reason it didn't lead to the results that we were hoping to achieve. And so through the working group process, we say, all right, well, what happened there? Why didn't that achieve our goal? And so then he says, okay, well, that didn't work because we missed this thing in the policy, or because this happened, or maybe we need to try this other thing. And so it's iterative in that a lot of times, like I said, we don't know, exactly how to achieve every single thing we're doing. And so we have to kind of do it step by step and trial and error on things until we get to a point where we feel like we're in good shape.
But just for argument's sake, if we want to have our over 90 accounts be less than 0.5% of bills, we know that. We may not know exactly how to get there. We may have to try different things, but we still know what the end state should be, right?
Yep.
And so we would have a measurement, I presume, I don't know, if we start off, it's 2.5%, we want to get to 0.5%, we got to reduce it by 2 over the next 5 years, at least you can have a progress.
Correct.
That's the thing about the years that to me is kind of, I get people work on a yearly basis, but anyway, the goal wouldn't change just because the process wasn't working.
Correct.
Unless you find out that the goal is just not reasonable.
Correct.
Or
So
unachievable.
in some,
I was gonna say, some are easier to quantify
Yes.
and define, some are more subjective.
Make
or
everybody
more
happy would be a hard way.
qualitative.
Reducing over 90s is a pretty easy
yeah,
one.
that's kind of what it like something like improve the budgeting process is a little bit more esoteric, but driving down the number of delinquencies or the number of bill disputes that we have is, we can put a number on that and we can track it. And so in cases like that, it still may be a bit trial and error in that we don't know exactly how to do that necessarily, because we've been trying it for multiple things for years to do these things. But this gives us a venue to say, this is what we're going to try, and then see how it fleshes out in the data by looking at, okay, we're going to put in this new way of, handling delinquencies, or we're going to change the way that we generate bills. And then we're going to watch that delinquency rate and see if it starts to go down in the time after we've adopted that new policy or way of doing things.
One more thing, sorry about this, but so then if we determine it's impossible to get to 0.5% delinquency,
Then
we
need
have
to
a
revisit the
mechanism
goal.
We adjust.
we pull a ripcord and say we're going to do something different.
Yeah, then we need to revisit the goal.
All right.
Yeah, and the reason, that's a big reason why we want to do benchmarkable.
Right.
We want to do benchmarkable targets most of the time, because
Oh, yeah.
we don't want to just
not
take a number out of
objective,
thin air
Yeah.
when every other utility is not doing that.
And then we did spend some time talking about this, that for the things that are not benchmarkable, this is an opportunity for us to sort of innovate and create the benchmarks.
Sure.
Because we have the data and we'll know what our
Yep.
experience is. And then in retrospect, we'll be able to say, hey, how did this tie to what our other goals were? The thing I'm getting when I listen to the questions of my colleagues is that, again, we want whatever esoteric or theoretical work we do to have a firm grounding in practical progress. And we need to be able to understand practical progress from a small and large scale. If we can do that, I think everybody will be fine with
Yep.
this. If we can't do that, there'll be constant problems with this. What are we doing?
Yep.
Yeah, we agree.
Yep.
I agree.
And going back to budgeting for a minute, I mean, yes, you have to try different things, but at the same time, it seems to me there should be something where we say we're sitting down, we're analyzing what we've tried and what hasn't worked, figuring out what we need, the timeline. You may have to go to the legislature or something like that. So there's got to be some kind of timeline that marks out these things, and not just for like the first step, but the whole process of solving a problem. I understand it has to have flexibility in it, but you've got to have I feel like I need an overview of what it is, not just this is what I'm doing now.
You can have the supposed steps in there, and then if you find that they're incorrect,
I mean,
you
they
gotta
have to be
change it.
adjusted,
I mean, I get the
adjusted.
milestones from 0 to the end of the
Yeah.
project.
Yeah, and I think that's, at least from an operational point of view, for a board oversight, without that information, we're kind of dealing with something very crazily amorphous, and I think we need to focus on that a little bit, and maybe operations is where we should do it, Tyler.
Yeah, I think that I'm happy to continue to work with you on that. You know, I think I've said this a few times before in these meetings that what we're undertaking here is really new for this utility, and it's really revolutionary in terms of, you know, getting the staff together and really driving progress towards common goals. I love your ambition, and I hope that one day we can get there. But in some cases, you know, we're asking folks who are already really busy to take on additional work, and I think that, you know, we have to crawl before we walk, and walk before we run.
I think we can achieve what you're asking in certain instances, but not in all instances.
Yeah. And so I think that's the work that I would like to do with you in operations is maybe we take on a few specific things that we want to really drive progress on, and we can focus a little more energy and time on doing that. But I think to ask to do that on every single tactic is a bit of a big chunk to chew off for us right now.
There'd be a lot of guessing anyways, just because it's new.
But guessing is okay if we understand the assumptions of sort of how you got to the guess, because that's perfectly valid, you know, to say, well, this is our best, you know, projection based on what we know today. But my other thought, because I do think some of this can kind of be dug into in the operations committee, but it may be that there's one working group that's kind of able to sort of pilot this type of thinking, and, you know, just is more kind of ready to do that for whatever reason. And that, so it might be interesting to kind of like, as people are sort of working towards next year's plan, to kind of ask them to, can they also layer on this thinking about what's the 5-year goal, and how are we sort of tracking progress there? Because I do understand that, like, for everybody to be doing this, I mean, you've come so far, right? But now we're like, okay, so we need some different information, and we want it communicated a certain way, and this is all about how we can explain things also to the public and stuff. So maybe like piloting it, you know, that thinking somewhere.
I think that's a good point, because I do think that in the implementation working groups, in developing the 2022 work plan, our approach was very much, don't get ahead of yourself, focus on the year ahead.
Right.
And I think the idea there was, we don't want to overwhelm the staff. This is all brand new again. So we wanted them to be realistic, because we didn't want them to shoot for the stars. And then, you know, we come to you and say, we're at 10% of this year, you know, in August, because we shot for the stars and we couldn't do it. So I think, you know, it is a good point that looking ahead to next year, maybe we can say, all right, let's start to look years ahead. Again, we're only going to assign ourselves over the next year what we think we can achieve, but let's start to plot out more longer term work plans for ourselves. All right. Great.
Okay. All right. Master planning process.
Yeah, so as Robin said, what we really wanted to spend the bulk of the time today doing is sort of revisiting this conversation around master planning for the utility. As I'm sure you all remember, when I joined the utility in 2019, I came to you and really began this conversation about the need for utility master planning. At that time, we developed a framework that really began with the strategic plan and then moved us into system planning. And so, you know, essentially part of this update today is to show you that, you know, we obviously were able to complete the strategic plan. We're moving well into implementation there. And so we feel like it's probably a good time for us to revisit this conversation around the master plan, since it's sort of the next step in our process. So I did want to remind you all of the master planning RFI that we put out in December of 2019. So we received those results in January. Obviously COVID then happened, and we were still able to conduct our workshop with those participants in April of that year via Zoom. And so, sorry, I don't know why this keeps going backwards. I just wanted to, you know, throw this up here. I put it in the packet just to kind of remind you of what some of the takeaways were from that workshop, because we want to, you know, keep in mind that we did do that. We don't want to sort of forget that we had all this valuable insight from these crucial partners and potential consultants. And we want to continue to use this as a sort of baseline for how we want to conduct the process going forward. And so these are sort of the top 6, issues that they identified that we needed to keep in mind throughout the process. So, developing a long-term funding source to implement the plans, really taking into account transformational approaches that balance, all of our different systems and innovate. Really making sure that the plans include sort of short-term goals so that we can demonstrate progress as we implement the plans, to make sure that community engagement is an essential aspect of the planning process. Again, implementing technology as a part of the process and implementation, and then attempting to really frame a one water framework. Since we are a one water utility, there are a lot of efficiencies that we already sort of take advantage of across our 3 systems. And so how do we continue to leverage that to really integrate the work that we do across our 3 systems?
What's the difference between the holistic approach that balances water, wastewater, stormwater, and a one water approach?
So the holistic approaches is really about sort of more coordination amongst different entities and the ways that we all work together. So I remember in this instance, they were talking in particular about, for instance, looking very much more long-term. There are a lot of other utilities that operate in this region. We probably are creating a lot of inefficiency by doing that. Are there ways that we could potentially consolidate or look at coordinating with other utilities so that we can be more efficient as a region? Looking at how our work, particularly in drainage, affects our groundwater, and how can we, balance that with some of our other work that we're doing. The One Water framework is more about, essentially saying that, everything that we're doing is related. How do we make sure that staff are, not working in their individual silos? So, of course, water purification operator is not necessarily going to be as integrated into the sewer or drainage side of things. But for instance, our networks folks who are out in the field doing work, they are often working on all 3 systems in different ways. And so how do we sort of leverage that expertise and sort of silo breaking in order to make sure that we're being as efficient as we can?
And these are not ranked, I presume?
No.
Not a one.
No. Yeah, this is just sort of big level. This is what we heard in the workshop as sort of our big takeaways and things that I just wanted to remind you of, so that you all know we didn't, we're still thinking about that process, and we still derive value from it. And these are things that I'm kind of like, I have in the back of my head, and I think we all should have in the backs of our heads as we're thinking about how we want to conduct this process. So just a kind of reminder of exactly what is a master plan in terms of how does this differentiate from other work that we've done. Master plans are really about determining the capability of our existing systems and projecting into the future to understand what our level of service needs to be, what do we need to do to maintain or achieve that future level of service. So, looking at, for instance, at a water treatment plant, what are we producing now? What is our population? What is our future population going to look like? What does the future water supply look like? These are all questions that are essential inputs into a master plan to understand, in 50 years, is there going to be enough water? Are we going to have enough? Are we going to produce enough water? Are we going to produce too much water? Are these things that we need to adjust in terms of how we operate our systems? They also help us to identify those newer, more innovative, and more efficient, cost-effective ways of meeting those needs. So, there's probably a lot of new treatment technologies in the world that our folks aren't aware of or don't know a lot about. And so this is a time when we can sort of stop what we're doing, reevaluate, and look at those options to adopt them. They also help us to estimate the magnitude, cost, timing of, and prioritize needed capital and operations-related projects. So again, it's that point where we can say, we know we need to do all of these things to achieve these things in the future. How do we prioritize how we're going to get there and estimate how much it's going to cost and what that effort's going to look like? It also helps to generate institutional and community support for those projects, and then crucially for a funding plan. So, in particular, every time we go and ask for additional revenue from the public, they say, what am I getting for that money? And I think that's a fair question to ask. These master planning processes are useful in allowing us to say, great, we developed this plan, here's the step-by-step process for how we're going to implement it, and this is exactly where your money is going to go.
So there is, when you say create a capital improvement plan, is there also a funding plan for that, or is that inherent in that?
It's inherent in that, you know, we would take the master plan and sort of operationalize that into our capital plan. And our capital plan is obviously what we use for our regular financial planning and rate setting exercise. It's just that, you know, as it happens now, the capital plan is sort of developed by, you know, like Ron and his guys are coming in and saying, we think we need this over the next 5 to 10 years. There's nothing wrong with that, except that it doesn't allow us the opportunity to look further ahead and start to prioritize those actions so that we can meet sort of an end goal. What we're doing now is really just kind of keeping everything working. We're making occasional improvements, we're incrementally getting there, but we're not in a concerted effort to make improvements or to replace things. This allows us to sort of take stock, develop a plan to do that, and then incorporate that into our capital plan so that, again, when we go to the city council and say we need an additional rate increase, and they say, well, what's it going to go for? We can say, we did this exercise, we're looking 30 years ahead, and we know we need this much money every year in order to, say, fully replace this plant or fully replace all these pipes. And so that in 30 years' time, hopefully they can look back and say, you actually did it, and this is what our money went to pay for. So I did want to just give a couple of examples. We talked about this example before, and I wanted to kind of bring it back up to your attention just to kind of remind you of a couple of examples that we've done here that would mirror the process that we're looking to do now. So this was a plan that was done in 2003. It was never actually adopted by the board. It was always left in draft, but we do still have access to it today, and I think there's still a lot of value in this plan. This was a water distribution system plan that was done, and really, you know, the essential aspects of this were to inventory all the system assets, to develop a hydraulic model that looks at the water distribution system. So again, it's that analysis section where you're saying, what do we have? How does it work? And then modeling our future levels of service in terms of our population. When you're looking at a distribution system, obviously you want to know, are there going to be areas where we're going to expand in the future? And if we're going to expand our city, do we need to, you know, increase the size of mains or valves or install additional pumps in order to reach those areas? In our case, we're probably looking at an opposite problem where we're maybe shrinking in some ways. And so a plan would look at ways that maybe as you're going in and replacing mains, maybe you can reduce some sizes or you can reduce capacity in some ways to become more efficient. And then put together a detailed capital program for actually doing that and prioritizing the projects. So at the time, this plan was, why does it keep doing that? Come on.
We're trying to go for the future and it keeps taking us.
I know, it
back.
just keeps going back.
Oh dear,
Story of our life.
Right.
not a good planning process.
Yes, yes.
At the time, this was about a $2.8 billion plan. So, you know, if you think about 2003 to 2022, we're probably looking at double that at this point. But we've also done a lot of work in the last 20 years on this. So this is something to keep in mind in terms of, you know, what a plan like this looks like. How it sort of ends up. This is the images that I'm showing you are sort of from the executive summary. So these are the top line figures that, you know, a group like the board or the city council or things like that would know. And then the document itself contains a whole heck of a lot of information that people like Ron and his staff will use to actually implement that plan over time in terms of, you know, where are the places we want to prioritize replacements, how do we want to do it, what sorts of materials do we want to use. It really goes into a lot of detail on methods and means of doing things. And so, you know, this is a really useful type of document to guide that work. The next example, one that you're much more familiar with because it's all happened in all of your 10 years here in the board, is our Power Master Plan. This was a little bit less comprehensive in that it was a more sort of tangible thing in terms of taking our power system, figuring out what we need, and then proposing a solution for the future. And so, you know, similarly though, it was about a technical analysis of our power needs and looking at our current system capabilities. One of the biggest things I think that came out of this was determining what is actually the firm number that we need in terms of power, and then looking at all the different ways that we could potentially do that. And so, you know, this is again a crucial part of a master planning process that is something that we don't typically do today, which is an alternatives analysis where we're saying, here is the entire realm of possibilities of things that we can do to achieve this goal, and how do we decide which one of those is what we actually want to do, and then prioritize how to get there. So, you know, in the Power Master Plan, I think there were 6 or 7 options that we had to choose from in terms of, do we want to go all in on self-generation? Do we want to stick with what we've got now and just continue to fix these old turbines? Do we want to go to all utility option where we don't generate anything? And everything in between there. And we had to go through, and I remember we all sat in a room and scored all these different things on different options, and then decided, all right, this is our selected alternative. And then it gives us a program for how do we actually implement that. And I think we've done a pretty good job of showing you how over the last couple of years, we've started to implement this plan by saying, all right, we have this next step in the process. We need to procure this next thing, or we need to do this next thing, and we check it off and we fund it and we start to put it out there in the world. So I think this is a great real world example that you're seeing in action for the power, pun intended, that a master plan has in terms of, you know, improving the way we do things here. So I did want to just kind of identify some of the challenges that I think we have been experiencing and will probably continue to experience in some ways over the next few years, and why it's taken us a little bit longer to come to you and say we're going to really start this process. The first is really just capacity. You know, as you know, staff turnover is a huge issue for us, and so there really is limited bandwidth to sort of manage this long-term planning process. You know, I can only do so much in terms of, you know, having technical inputs for consultants to help. Consultants are great, but they have to be managed. And so there's going to be endless questions with a process of, you know, how does this work? Where does this go? What do you want to do here? And that all requires input from engineers and technical folks. And so that's something that we're working on. You know, we've brought in some additional staff. As you know, we're going to be hiring more the deputy general superintendents who are going to help take over more of the leadership role in that organization. And as we continue to staff those folks up, that capacity is just going to continue to open up, and we can really start to look at this work more in earnest and really make sure that we're managing it appropriately. You know, something that I heard loud and clear from this committee in particular when we brought this idea to you in 2019 was that our ongoing customer service challenges really inhibit our ability to engage with our customers on long-term planning. And I think, again, that's, you know, I want to make it clear that that was heard loud and clear, and there's a reason why we've tried to be a little bit more thoughtful in how we want to roll this out, and why we've taken a little bit more time. Is we want to make sure that when we do approach the community to discuss this process, that we're able to do it from a place of trust and credibility, and that we're actually going to implement what we're asking them to give us input on. And finally, you know, of course, funding is always an issue around here. You know, we are going to look to request some fair share funding. That is available to us to fund these planning efforts, but always, you know, these planning processes are not cheap. Because they do involve a lot of analysis, typically in, you know, developing models and things like that go into the process. It's just a lot of staff time. And so, you know, we will be looking to request some funding from the Infrastructure Advisory Board to fund these processes. And so that should help us in that regard. So today I'm just kind of presenting this very broad framework for your input, and that is to essentially go with a sort of slower start of what I'm calling the quote-unquote master plan, to do more targeted system technical plans sort of over time in this iterative way where we can sort of bite off little bits that we can digest at a time, rather than undertaking this really big, massive effort that's going to be really hard to manage. And so, you know, what we'd be looking to do is really starting off with a water purification master plan. So looking at what do we need to do in terms of our water treatment plants. I'll talk a little bit more detail about that in a second. There's also some really great other work going on in other areas that I think we can begin to leverage towards developing master plans for the other areas. So, you know, there's a lot of work happening at both of our wastewater treatment plants as a result of Hurricane Ida and some issues that we had there that I think will be really great to adapt into more formal plans in the future. So, you know, we are looking to upgrade some of those facilities at the present, and so there's some analysis already happening that I think would, you know, easily streamline into a master plan there. That 2003 water distribution plan we showed you easily can be updated to today. You know, we've replaced quite a few mains over the last 20 years, but we can easily input those into that plan and essentially come out with the same output, which is everything that we haven't replaced since 2003 that still needs to be replaced at this point. So we just need to update that plan. We could put it into place. We are also working to complete our sewer system model, which would be a critical input into any future plan on our sewer system. And finally, you know, not necessarily saying we're not going to do anything on stormwater and drainage right now, but looking to do a more expansive visionary process on how we want to adapt our stormwater and drainage system to climate change once we've really sort of demonstrated that we can finish these planning processes on the more technical systems that we operate.
I'm a little confused by one thing. If we're just taking the 2003 water distribution plan and updating it, how do we get into vision, taking into account all the changes that have occurred, and just kind of, that locks us into some kind of past thinking. And so I'm a little concerned about that as an approach to a planning process, as opposed to saying this is what we know needs to know. We know these things need to happen with the water system.
Yeah, so any, I guess, visioning or bigger picture approach will start with knowing what you have, right? So we're fortunate we have a recent one, even though it's a few years old, to update it as the platform of, okay, what else can we do, right? You start looking at capacity, you start looking at level of service, do you add more water towers, do you add booster pumps, there are a lot of things that will happen naturally as part of a master plan, but that would be a key first step for anything.
Right, it's a step, but it's not
not the ultimate.
Not the ultimate, because
No.
the ultimate is the balancing act among all these.
Right.
That's the hard part of it.
Yeah.
So
So
is
it's
it
like
the-
this is information collecting
Yeah.
or analysis.
You can call it that for
Okay.
certain, but it's a very key step that has to
Yeah,
happen
okay.
before the next bigger step happens.
Yeah, I think there's a reason that I'm using the term technical plans,
Okay.
because this is really, for the most part, these are engineering exercises.
Okay.
Like I said, they're saying what do we have, what do we need to have in the future, and how do we do that from a technical point of view, which is, again, why I'm putting master plan sort of in quotes, is that then gives us all of the technical things that we need, things that we have, that we can sort of then, as a utility and as a board, can start to prioritize how are we going to actually implement all of this stuff that we have to do over the next 30 to 50 years.
I have some comments. So one of the things that I'm hearing in what you're saying is that we're talking about systems change, right? And not sort of annual capital improvements, but really systems change, which I think, Janet, may be kind of what.
Yeah, I didn't
Maybe
see the
what you were
system
saying.
change. If
Yeah,
you,
yeah. So the water distribution plan is a piece of information, and it's an important step. But like, what is the system that we need?
Sure.
To be able to manage this for us. And so and I think it's just important to kind of talk about that. That is what our goal is here, is like, how do we change our systems to
Yep.
be able to support this city? The second thing is, when we talk about funding or financing, it seems that there's going to be some stuff that's bigger than what we generally are able to put together, right, for our annual kind of capital improvements. And so I just wanted to suggest that we are very deliberate about those discussions and talk about, financing strategies. Poco and I hear from people all the time about they have ideas for, financing and thinking about kind of long-term investment. And so if there's a process, Gray, where we can kind of, look at that, and because it just goes hand in hand, right? It's not going to be as simple as like, well, here's what we need this year, and are we going to go to the feds for this, and the city for that, and the customers for this? I think this is just like going to introduce a new way of thinking about this stuff.
Yep.
And then the last thing is, which was not mentioned at all here, is climate change and how we're going to have to build something that can be adapted
Yep.
to the stuff that we don't even know.
Yep.
Right? And so it kind of means like scientists are involved in this to do some of that modeling, and it's not just sort of the engineering modeling. It's like, what are the projections, and how are those projections changing, and what is our process to continuously adapt our master plan to this changing world?
Yep.
That we can't predict.
Do we have some kind of a model that we're using that says what the climate's gonna be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
So there are multiple sources depending on what we're talking about. So, for instance, if we're talking about our source water for our water purification plants, there's a number of different sources we would look at in terms of there are models of supply from the Mississippi River. I think that obviously maybe some of you saw there was an article last week in the NOLA.com about a potential avulsion in the river, which would be devastating for us. But I think that's something we need to keep in mind was what would we do if the Mississippi River changed course. There are also obviously sea level rise models that would show saltwater
I know
intrusion
there's
in
a
the
lot
river.
of stuff, and my question is, have we identified what we're gonna use? We can't just use a lot of stuff.
Not yet, but we will. I mean, there'll be some key drivers. And what models are you going to use to drive decisions? Yes.
How are we gonna do that?
Just collectively, as part of having expertise in the room, that
Yeah.
know what to use and what's the most recent model that is more solid than others or reliable or.
I think it's part of the master planning process that you would take all of these different models that you would use for different things, and our technical experts would determine by priority which of those risks we think are the biggest.
So, and I don't wanna spend too much on this, but who are our technical experts? Who would that be?
It would be our engineers, our operators, folks that are in the room, who would be driving decision making around those different options. So, like I said during the Power Master Plan, I remember it was.
It seems to me we ought to be talking to somebody like NASA or somebody else who actually studies this full time. I'm
No,
serious.
seriously,
about
like,
this.
there,
I mean, for
I
us to
guess I'm not
decide-
understanding where you're talking more about the sources of data,
Yes.
and I'm more talking about how we would use those sources.
I'm talking about which
So-
sources you use.
Yeah. So
It's
obviously
like the
those are-
hurricane models, they go
it's-
all over the place.
Yeah, the models are coming from NOAA, they're coming from NASA, they're coming from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. There are a lot of different data sources out there.
I'll say it a different way. We need a defined process to do that that's published, and it shouldn't be, in my view, unless this agency's got expertise to do this, which would surprise me because
We will be relying on outside.
Yeah, we would be relying on outside
So-
data.
And
I'm
expertise.
saying let's define how that's gonna
Yeah.
happen over
So-
the next 15
Yeah, they will. I mean, we don't have.
Because
the
everybody
answers now,
says
but-
climate change, and most people don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I'm one of those most
Sure.
people.
No, I'm a fan of that as well, where we need critical outside support.
Yes.
I mean, so the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, I think we now have a long history in Louisiana and the state of looking at this kind of modeling.
Yes.
And it would be interesting to kind of understand in more detail how they do that. So they have they have panels of scientists that kind of vet things and look at the information and look at the engineering and see if the engineering is gonna stand up to what they're predicting the future is.
I'm
gonna
just looking
look
for a
like.
formal process that we follow.
Exactly,
Yep.
yeah,
So that's
yeah.
all.
So, I agree.
And just quickly, I do want to say, we're not the only utility in the country that's experiencing these
Oh, gosh,
problems, and
yeah.
so
Right.
this
So
has
we shouldn't do
become
it
a-
alone.
Exactly.
We're not doing it alone.
So we're
It works.
there.
It shouldn't.
This has become a
I'm not trying to
standard
pick a
process
fight.
of developing master plans for utilities. That all of the consultants that work on this know the sources of data and have processes that they use for interpreting it and inputting it into a planning process.
Just want to go back to the funding remarks. I mean, one thing that we're definitely focusing on is connecting any future rate adjustments to a known capital plan, right? So we are asking for money that support a specific known plan to allow us to fund through most likely just debt service, that allow us to bring in
Financing,
a significant amount of money to support these big projects, but the ability to pay those debt in a timely fashion, right? So that's a new approach that I don't think the utility.
Telling the public this is what this money goes to, this is why you should vote for it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, a known course with known costs.
Which is logical.
implications.
You said that the information's gonna be going to our engineers, obviously. But one of the things that I'm wondering about is our engineers have grown up in one system. And there are other ways of doing things, which I think New Orleans is often very bad at exploring. How are we going to get beyond our limited point of view, the way we have been doing things?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Sure.
Well, first of all, we have a very solid engineering staff. I mean,
Sure.
very, very good at what they do. And while they are used to doing certain things, they know that there are other options, other alternatives out there. They're open-minded to know what the engineering world can offer. But we have to make it clear that we are bringing outside experts, the best in the field. That's why we started with the workshop, inviting everybody that can help us with this, right, as potential, to bolster our ability to be visionary and bring best practices, best models out there to introduce to the city and support them and fund them. So
At this point, where we have the step that's set up here, do we have outside experts at this point?
So we would be procuring consultant support in order to do this. That's a crucial thing that I guess I should have said, is that none of this can be done without consultants. There is no capacity to do this as a fully in-house operation. This would require consultants, and so like I pointed out before, that is an essential part of the master planning process for any of these systems, is that they're going to bring us expertise around new treatment technologies, new technologies for pipe replacements, things like that our engineers may be familiar with. As Ghassan said, they're all people who are active in the industry. They know what's out there, but they focus day to day on what we are already doing. We're going to seek out that expertise from folks who implement new systems in other places and have design and technical expertise and other ways of doing things to help bring us that knowledge.
just like the Power Master Plan, we've demonstrated the process, right, in including outside experts, utilizing what we know, the institutional knowledge, and coming up with a very doable, realistic plan, and we're implementing it as we speak, as you know. So
This is just a first step, right?
yeah.
Okay, so if you start with the bullet, slower start a master plan with more targeted system technical plans. I assume those are subsets of that.
Yep.
And then there's another bullet that goes on with integration of those plans, introduction of other ideas. What happens?
So once we have the plans, then it's about developing the funding plan and prioritizing, how are we actually going to implement all of this work? Like realistically, we're probably looking at outputs from these in the, tens of billions of dollars in terms of need over the next 30 to 50 years. And that's obviously not something that we can afford based on the type of revenue that we generate today. So that's when the really dirty work starts of how do we actually make this thing happen? How do we do the things we need to do in order to continue our operational success and adapting our systems?
So this will grow and evolve, obviously, with the help of outside influence and expertise.
Yeah.
It's just start.
So I did just want to quickly, sort of drill down a little bit into the first step we're looking at, which is water purification. And I think most of you already know that, both of our plants are quite aged at this point and need a significant investments. While we're continuing to produce high quality products, looking forward, there are going to be additional water quality regulations that are coming down the line that we need to be prepared for. And we can also probably just be a whole heck of a lot more efficient in our processes, so that we can use less energy, use less water, use less, resources in general, and produce a higher quality product at a cheaper cost if we can upgrade those systems. But yeah, to your point, Janet, we do have some limited knowledge around what new treatment technologies exist, and in particular, what it takes to implement them and how much they cost. We may know what's out there in the world, but if I say to the Chad or Ron or others, what do we need to do to actually move towards this technology? A lot of times it's kind of like, I don't know, it's probably going to be about this much money, but we have to, look into it. And so this is the time when we can looking at a master plan for these plants is when we can take stock, pull in that outside expertise, and actually develop a cost estimate and a plan for implementing new technologies. And then, good.
A couple of things I want to underscore here. I've toured the plants as part of me understanding what's going on, because engineering is not my home base. I was raised by an engineer, so I'm recovering secondary engineer. What I think is important as we talk about how we're moving forward with our cost and technology is acknowledging our lost partnerships and lost revenue. We have multiple universities that produce people in these areas and fields that can, to Janet's point, drive new information, new ways of thinking, new technology. Those partnership programs give us pipelines of skilled professionals that are future employees. and also drive up our innovation costs. That needs to be a part of this. Second, there are byproducts of this water purification process that have retail value on the market. We currently don't sell any of those things that can offset some of these growth and reorganization opportunities. So when we're talking about this, I don't want this to purely be focused on just sort of the technology, but also focused on our partnerships and focused on revenue generating streams.
Absolutely.
Yep, absolutely. And, you know, for instance, in the strategic plan, we had specific work in there around new revenue generation from our byproducts. And so I think that's an essential thing that we've taken on as a goal of ours and would look to incorporate that into any master planning process. Is if we're adopting a new treatment process, we want to, you know, prioritize a process that would generate, you know, a product or revenue that we could utilize to offset the costs of adopting that new technology. And so, you know, again, the existing funding sources that we use now in our existing capital process is really focused on repair projects and piecemeal investments, but those don't necessarily benefit our customers in the long term because they're just continuing to perpetuate the same age of facilities that we have now. And so, you know, one of the biggest reasons why we're pushing this out the door first is not only because of the need, but also because of the potential opportunities for funding that do exist, you know, with the infrastructure bill that's occurred. You know, this was kind of like a light bulb moment for me that when we were really first convening our group of internal stakeholders that are developing projects for the Infrastructure Act money, you know, most of these programs are focused on drinking water and sewer. They're not necessarily as focused on drainage. And so, you know, there's a lot of money out there for water purification plant improvements, but we don't have a master plan currently. So it's hard for us to come up with projects that would really transform the process. All the projects we're coming up with are things that, you know, we need to replace this thing, we need to upgrade this thing, but they're not, you know, holistic replacement of our system or reevaluation of the process. And so this is why we really want to push this one out there as soon as possible so that we don't waste an opportunity for this big funding that's coming down that we could potentially use to, you know, perhaps replace the entire plant over the next 5 years rather than, you know, continuing to just double down on the existing process that we use. And so I did want to just kind of give a little bit of information too on, you know, a path forward on how we want to engage with the community on the overall master planning process. I think, again, it was very much heard from this committee early on that, you know, we need to sort of tread lightly in how we work with our customers and that we need to be more targeted in the work that we do with the community. So, you know, one of the things that we've done over the last few years that I think has been very successful is implement our Customer Advisory Committee, which is a group of 13 members of the community that we meet with also monthly. And really that has been a group that has become a group of people who are sort of trusted community advisors who give us information on the work that we're doing, but have also become messengers in the community and are able to communicate with their networks about the work that we're doing. And so I think it's been a very valuable use of our time and our resources to invest in those relationships. And so the next step with that group that we'd like to do is to put together what we're tentatively calling a Public Water Academy, but really as a way to invite customers in and really show them what we're doing, tell them our story, and build trust with them about the work that we're doing. And so we'd like to use them as sort of a first cohort as a part of the Water Academy so that they can be really experts about what it is that we're doing and bring that knowledge back to their community. And then over time, we can continue to invite customers in terms of completing this program so that we can just continue to create more and more trusted community experts who are there to, you know, really help us tell our story and tell our message in the community. Another thing we'd like to do is, you know, over the next year or so, really sort of start hosting more of these community listening sessions where we can have, you know, Ghassan, members of his leadership team, perhaps members of the board if they'd like to join, to really go out and just sort of have conversation with community about, you know, the issues that they're facing from the utility, helping to tell them our story in terms of where we've gotten, where we are today. And so it's less about going out and saying, you know, what do you want us to do? It's more about going out and saying, this is what we've been doing. What are your challenges so that we can listen and show the community that we're listening and really use that as a foundation for developing how we want to approach the community in the future. Another thing that we're already doing, but I think we'd like to do more of, is to continue to meet community partners where they're at. Recently, Ghassan and I were invited to go and join a consortium of neighborhood organizations that works under the name WaterWise in the community. Ghassan wasn't able to join at the last minute because he was ill, but I was able to join, and we're rescheduling our meeting with him. But they took me out in the community. We looked at all of these green infrastructure projects that they've been building on private property and public property with their own funds. And it was a really great conversation because, sitting on the bus, I'm able to sit next to these members of the community, and, they're saying, well, why is the rates going up? Why are our bills so high? Why is this happening? And I was able to just level with them and start to tell them that story of how we got where we are. We've had this deferred maintenance over time. We had, a long time where we didn't have rate increases. That story that we're always trying to tell the community. And it was a really great conversation. They really understood what I was saying, and we really were able to build a lot of trust just in an hour and a half on a bus. And so I think we'd like to continue to do more work like that, where we're going out in the community and just meeting with people and having informal conversations with them, so that we can build a baseline of trust and then build off of that towards more engagement that we want to do over time, so that we're not just going out and saying, we're having these big community meetings, what do you guys think? What do you want us to do here? It's more about saying, this is what we've been doing, what are your problems? We can start to retool and look at ways that we can solve those, and then sort of build off of that. And we also did want to ask, just in terms of those community partners, if there are community partners that you're aware of that you think that we should be working with. We'd love to get your suggestions on that.
What's the name of the group you mentioned? That was a...
WaterWise?
What?
WaterWise?
WaterWise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so currently I think they're working, there's Healthy Community Services in the 7th Ward, there's Greater Treme Consortium in the Treme, there's Bunny Friend Neighborhood Association in the 9th Ward, Holly Grove Neighborhood Association, there's a Lower 9th Ward group, and there's a New Orleans East group. And they all work together towards building green infrastructure on their homes, in their neighborhoods. So it's really about mitigating flooding, but then they've also started taking on larger climate issues. They're planting trees, they're installing community weather stations. So it's really a community-based program to educate community members about our stormwater challenges. And they're doing a way better job than we are of telling the story of why it floods when it floods and things like that. And so I think that that's something that we need to help rely on and build trust with them, so that we can tell that story together, because they have a lot more credibility than we do. And like I said, they're a lot better at telling the story than we are. And so if we can partner with them and tell our story that way, I think it's going to be a lot better received and a lot better trusted.
Yeah, I saw them. I've been trying to get a rain barrels in my house forever. So if anybody's listening, Shoals still wants rain barrels.
All right, we'll get you. I'll get you in touch.
I believe in it. I'll do the permeable. I'm hook, line, and sinker. I'm in.
All right.
Replace concrete with bricks to make it permeable. I'm down like 4 flat tires.
We know people who know.
Yep, we'll get you
So
connected.
the other partnership suggestions is I really think that we miss our opportunity to understand our role as a STEM leader. Everybody's focused on STEM. We want our children to understand science, technology, engineering, and math. Those are things we use at this agency all the time. So we should be partnering with our universities and STEM departments. We should partner with New Orleans Public Schools. They have science fairs. They have STEM pipeline programs. We have opportunities for kids that are interested in STEM to come. And of course, programs like Calvin Mackey's program focusing on STEM that rotate which areas of STEM they focus on. We're a natural partner. People connect through their kids, and if we are a resource for their kids to be future engineers and doctors, they will think highly of us, and we have the ability to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
So organizations like WaterWise and also the Water Collaborative have been founded very much around drainage. And I was wondering if their leadership might be included in the Public Water Academy, because expanding what they are communicating about and advocating about to water purification, sewage, I think would be really important, because you do have amazing communicators there. They're great storytellers. They can be real allies and advocates for us, but they're about drainage. Like that.
Yep.
That's how they the water organizations in this town are about
That's
drainage.
right. Yeah, so Cheryl Austin, who's a participant in WaterWise, is also on our customer advisory
Okay.
committee. So similarly, she's going to be involved in that. And I think that you're right that, when I was on that bus tour with them and they're talking about, they want to talk about is stormwater.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to integrate in conversations
Yeah.
about water and wastewater. You could see that they were, they're starting to understand again this story of the fact that we
One water.
are an integrated utility.
Yeah.
And that we have we're juggling a lot more issues than maybe it's
Yeah.
obvious. There goes my computer.
Yeah.
Well, luckily we were on the last slide.
You can fit
but-
Jessica in as well from Water Collaborative. But
Yes, for
I
sure.
think just because that organization also has tons of influence now in the community and,
Yeah, and so we have, I think Hassan presented to the board, was that in June, our partnership with Blue Conduit on the lead service line replacements. Part of that work is also partnering with the Water Collaborative to do community education around lead service lines. So, yeah,
great.
it's a great comment that, looking at ways that we can expand beyond drainage with the community, because obviously flooding, I think, is a number one concern, but we need a little more customer and community visibility on our water and wastewater systems as well.
You have to find a way when they sort of figure out that drainage is the last on our list. Like I think bringing them in really soon to
Yep.
kind of talk about the logic and, why we're moving forward in this way.
Yep.
Is important.
Two things. One, I think that this slide that sets out the process should be expanded so you know what's coming after.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's confusing to the board and the public. The second thing is when we're talking about community outreach, we tend to focus on advocacy groups, but I think that there are a lot of people in this town that are just residents, and they operate through neighborhood associations. And I think besides hearing from advocates, you've got to hear from just people who are vested as homeowners in this community.
Yep.
They have different points of view from.
Yeah, and I think that's the idea of doing the listening sessions is that, we're already in touch with all the advocates and so we're looking to partner more with them to get deeper. But I think the listening sessions are there to allow us to go out to meet neighborhood associations or maybe, unassociated groups of folks in different neighborhoods to hear their concerns and show them the work that we're doing.
And I don't see why they're treated differently. You just drew some distinction that I don't quite understand, because to me, this is a group, these are huge groups of people that represent a point of view in the community, and they may not be
I think,
organized.
yeah.
You're spot on, you're
Yeah.
spot on. As a matter of fact, there's an upcoming event that involves all neighborhood associations all in one room. I think it's orchestrated by the mayor or the mayor's team. So I'm one of the presenters, so I did that when I first came, and then obviously with COVID, there was a period of time where it didn't happen, but we're starting that, so it's gonna be organic, and we're gonna be in front of these, effective groups shortly, so, and then it would hopefully be on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. The only reason I draw a distinction is because most of the partners, the advocates, like I said, we already know them. So we're starting from a different baseline with them, with the community groups, neighbor associations, et cetera. We're going to be starting largely at ground zero. So I think it's about, just treating them a little bit differently in terms of, what we're discussing initially and how we're approaching them.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay, thank you, Tyler. That was a very great presentation, great conversation. Is there any public comment?
No public comment.
Okay, great. If there are no other matters, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor, please indicate by saying yay.
Yay?
Any opposed? Motion carries. Now I get to use the gavel.
Thank you.
We are now adjourned.
Forward gavel.
Yeah, yes.
I've never used the gavel before.
Doesn't even